Why do you change it unless it's broken? If it's not broken, you don't change it. If he's just a rogue cop who makes a dumb use of force decision, why do you change the policy? You change it because he didn't do anything wrong, but you don't like the reasons it happened. The reasons it happened is not because Rob Sanders went out on a limb, it's because he did what he was supposed to do and it was a bad outcome, and you get worried about what the press is going to say and what the public is going to say. But when the lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Division says, we don't have a policy that requires him to do anything other than what he did, and yet he is rung up on that policy, well, it's clear he's nothing but a fall guy. Abusive and improper treatment of a prisoner. A separate charge under the city ordinance. Something that applies to every city employee. Well, how does it apply to a police officer? It applies through the policies and procedures of the police department. There is no separate standard. If there is, it is undefinable. It is completely subjective. It is the eye of the beholder as far as what's abusive and what's improper treatment. If there is no boundary on that finding, then it is fundamentally unfair to just unilaterally say, well, I think that's abusive and you're gone. How do you defend yourself from that? You defend yourself by saying, I was within the policy on use of force. I was within the policy on providing medical attention. And if it were really true that there's some separate fundamental standard premised on basic human dignity, why did it only apply to Rob? Why would it only apply to the senior guy in the room? Does basic human dignity not apply to Officer Kreitz? He was there. He knew the guy had been bounced off the wall. Officer Hibbler was there. He knew the guy had been bounced off the wall. They were both exonerated. How can that be? If basic human dignity requires you to do something more, then how can it be that it only applies to Rob Sanders? Because Rob Sanders is the fall guy for a practice that the chief probably rightly looks back at and says, I don't think this is a good idea. And he changes it. But when you've been taught how to do something and what to do for 18 years, and then you do it exactly the way you've been taught, when your use of force lead instructor gets up here and says, yep, that's how we did business, that's within our training and our policies, how do you hold him responsible for that? Only him responsible for that. Prejudgment is what's at issue here. Do the IA, but there's nothing you're going to find that's going to change my mind. Sergeant, lieutenant, captain, deputy chief, yeah, you can agree with the IA, but it doesn't matter. I make the decisions. In your companies, is it fair? Is it consistent? Is it equitable to use a fall guy to affect change? Is it fair to spring something on somebody that everybody else has done, that everybody else expects is going to be done, and then impose a rule and retroactively apply it to him? You should have done something more as far as getting him medical aid. Well, you shouldn't have gone in that cell. You should have just gone and gotten him a drink of water. Well, maybe, but it doesn't change the fact that what he was expected to do was go into that cell. And so that's what he did. Draw the distinction. Is the force allowed? Well, by God, it's required at that point. So the door opens. Is the force objectively unreasonable? No. End of inquiry on force. Medical aid, no policy. No policy at all. Abusive and improper treatment. What's the standard? How do you not make it so ambiguous that it's indefinable? Clear up through the chain of command. Everybody said Rob was okay. He did it right. It wasn't based on relationships. It wasn't based on friendships. It was based on an investigation that showed the facts and said, this is our policy and our practice. And it's unfair to hold one guy accountable for something that nobody else is held accountable for. You don't change the policy, change the policy. You want to stop people from putting them on the rings, stop people from putting them on the rings. But don't go on television and say Rob Sanders is a criminal. Don't vilify a man. Don't take his career away from him. Don't drag his mud through the name through the mud, excuse me, for doing what he was expected and trained to do. If it's a lousy system, fix it. But don't nail the guy. Don't crucify the guy who is simply implementing your system. I implore you to read the Internal Affairs report. I implore you to recall the testimony of the witnesses, the expectations of the department, the lack of discretion to do anything else in that situation. I implore you to look at these facts objectively, that everybody else said, this is okay. How is that fair and transparent and consistent and equitable to wind up with Rob Sanders being termed? Please reinstate him and let's get on with his career. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it very much. It's been a very long day.
Thank you. Mr. Noyce?